at this as reality, and it's something that there's probably something you can do about it, but that can only be done with knowledge and with an open mind. Our leadoff speaker here is going to be Alex Myers from the Donkey Sanctuary. Alex has a history of doing all kinds of good things in the world, various development programs, literacy, and so on and so forth. Most recently, he's been working with the Donkey Sanctuary, trying to find out what is going on with donkeys in Africa and how it relates to the donkey hide trade in China. And so without taking up any more of your time, I'm going to pass you over to Alex. And these presentations will be on WOVA, and you can go ahead and download them whenever you want to look at it some more.
Thank you. Morning, everybody. Can you all hear me? Good. Super. Okay, my name's Alex. Thank you very much, Eric. Okay, just before I start, I just want to give a couple of quick acknowledgements, really. The work that I'm presenting here and the reports, which we've got some copies of just on our table outside, is partly work that I've been doing this year, but it's not just me by any stretch of the imagination. There's people in this room who have been absolutely fundamental to getting this information together, people who spotted it much earlier and were putting together building the picture of what was happening, and there's people in this room such as David Duncan, Marjorie Farabee, but also people like Dr. Richard Suna in Malawi, Dr. Faith Burden as well, who was instrumental in putting this report together. So this is a big collaborative piece from all of our network of partners across the world. Someone else that deserves a little bit of credit is a young man by the name of Walter, who is our office post-traumatic stress disorder mitigation officer. He has been more important this year to me in particular than he will ever know. We know this about donkeys. This is me completely preaching to the converted in this room. We know the importance of donkeys, what they do for us, what they have done for us, and what we owe them. If you look at the top line, you've got livelihoods, you've got carts supporting people in West Africa, you've got Indian construction sites, brick kilns, you've got the work that donkeys do ploughing and agriculture. In the middle line, you've got guard donkeys. That donkey there has little sheep, little lambs in its panniers. You've got a woman there collecting water with her child on her back. She can collect more water and have that child with her, with that donkey. Expedition mules in Morocco, working in tourism, working in entertainment. In the center at the bottom, you've got donkeys working in disasters, in floods, in droughts, bringing food and water to the other animals, not just the people. You've got donkey-assisted therapy, that kind of work, that relationship, that effective relationship that donkeys have with people. Bottom left, no, not a moon donkey, but that's a bee collecting donkey in Brazil. Someone had such empathy for their donkey that they actually made it a suit because they know how bad it is to be stung by a bee. In addition to these many multifunctional roles that a donkey has in the world, there's one that we don't always like to talk about very much, and that is the role of donkeys in production. It makes us a little bit uncomfortable, so as Eric was saying, we'd like to try and suspend judgment a little bit about whether donkeys should or shouldn't be used for these things and just accept that they are used for these things, and then we can move forwards from there. Big black donkeys like this in China, the big black mammoths, they're used for their skins. Also donkeys are eaten in communities across the world. Donkeys are milked, but also things like urine. I've heard in a number of countries where I've traveled to, donkey urine being collected to treat asthma. Placentas being used, eyelashes, all manner of different things. The role of donkeys in production is something that we can't ignore. There's one particular role of the donkey, and that is with the skin, which historically has been used in China for a very, very long time as part of a traditional Chinese medicine called jiao. Now, jiao is boiled down skins, which are probably stuffed full of collagen like any skin would be, but it's believed to have therapeutic properties, particularly for women's reproductive health, also general fatigue. So what happens is the donkey's skins are then boiled down and formed into this product. It's like a brittle brown bar. You'd break a piece off, mix it with some hot water and drink it like a tonic. Now historically that's been used as a traditional Chinese medicine for a long time, but more recently it's being marketed not so much medicinally, but much more as a beauty treatment. So something which people could have for anti-aging properties and general well-being. You know that feeling when you wake up in the morning and you really don't want to go to work? this is how this is being marketed across China. It's being marketed very obviously with donkeys in mind. There's in some of the centers, I think there'll be more people talking about the Chinese marketing side of this a little later. But there are donkey theme parks almost built around this industry where people can go. It's very, very above board. It's not just donkeys in these products, they're also cut with skins from other animals, such as cows or pigs as well. The difficulty is the scale of this. As time has gone on, and as this marketing machine has been going much faster, the numbers of donkeys in China has been falling. Now, something that has to be said is any statistics that talk about donkey numbers, you have to take with a giant mug of salt, not just a little pinch. People don't count donkeys particularly successfully, so we just have to accept that there's going to be some glitchy data when it comes to populations. Doing this on a brown background was a bit of a fail on my side as well, I'm afraid. The scale on the bottom of here, you don't need to look at the details, I'll talk you through it. The scale here is the scale of my life. I was born in 1981, back at the far left. At that time, there was about 8 million donkeys in China, and that was rising to about 11 million donkeys in the 90s. Since then, the population's been plummeting very quickly. So the last FAO data from 2014 was about 6 million donkeys in China then. Since then, we believe from the industry and from other triangulated sources from around the place, and again, mug of salt, it's more like 3 million, 4 million donkeys in China. It's been falling at a remarkable rate over the last few years. Of course, mechanization is part of that, but it's not solely responsible. Those donkeys were still going somewhere after mechanization maybe replaced them in the fields. I'm going to put on the next 7 countries in the top 8 donkey populations in the world, and you'll see it's quite a different trend. Countries like the purple line of Ethiopia is rising to about 7.5 million, maybe 8 million today. Other countries like Pakistan also rising, about 5 million there. And then others. You'll see some kind of weird data going on, like Egypt had this giant drop-off. Probably it wasn't anything to do with donkeys disappearing, it was probably just they started counting in a better way. So there's all sorts of issues with that. We kind of do the best we can with the data, but nonetheless it is a bit flawed. What we found as we were tracking this, we had a meeting with our African partners in 2015, and we started hearing rumors about donkeys disappearing from communities across Africa, and we couldn't quite figure it out. First of all, we heard reports of Namibia saying that they were exporting live donkeys, and they had this agreement to export live donkeys to China, which of course is going to be horrific for welfare, so we investigated quickly. Turned out to be smoke and mirrors, nothing to it at all. So we kind of kept that in mind and kept on looking and kept our ears open. Donkeys started disappearing from East Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, West Africa, cases where donkeys were being found slaughtered. The skins were gone, but the meat was still on there. So all of these kind of weird patterns were emerging, but it was all over the place. We started to track them outside Africa as well in other places, such as the Americas and in Central Asia. We couldn't figure out what was going on, so we commissioned a piece of research which turned into this report. This is the case in January when we launched this report. Again, don't look at the detail, I'll talk you through it. The red countries and the blue countries combined are countries where we tracked donkeys' skins disappearing from those countries and being sent to China. There's a good likelihood that there's more than this, but these are the ones that we could provide evidence for. These are the ones that we could actually prove had skins disappearing. The green country, of course, is China. That was the destination country for these skins, the sole demand country, essentially. Although skins were disappearing first to Vietnam from places like East Africa, they couldn't go straight to China because of disease risk, so they were going via Vietnam, where they were stamped as a Vietnamese export, and then into China. Hong Kong, Japan, and to a lesser extent Korea as well, have also been sort of hubs on the way to China. The 2 orange countries, Namibia and Australia, have been considering, at this point, were considering exporting donkeys. The blue countries were the 5 countries that we knew about which had stopped the trade. So Pakistan in Asia, and then 4 countries in West Africa from left to right, Senegal, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. These are countries that had seen what was going on before we really put 2 and 2 together, and they'd stopped either the slaughter or the exports of live donkeys or skins. Each country's done it in a slightly different way, so we're kind of categorizing those as countries that have stood against the trade in some way. That was in January. The next map that I'm going to show you is the same map, but it's the situation today as far as we can prove. Quite a bit has changed. You'll see the number of blue countries in particular has increased dramatically. As well as the 4 countries in West Africa, more have been added: Ghana, Togo, Chad, Senegal, Gambia as well. In East Africa, Ethiopia, Tanzania and Uganda have all turned blue, and that's them closing slaughterhouses and stopping exports of skins. In Southern Africa, Botswana, Zimbabwe, each of those have also closed down the trade in some way. Australia has turned red. We've tracked the first export of donkey skins leaving Australia. Namibia is still orange. There's an awful lot going on down in Namibia. The slaughterhouses which are being proposed in Namibia would essentially slaughter the entire population of Namibian donkeys within 3 years. Sustainable utilization is in their constitution, so now that we've raised some of these issues and started shouting about it a little bit louder, I think they'll have a hard time getting that through without an awful lot of scrutiny. Just to give you an idea of numbers, and again, salt. Each one of those donkeys represents about 1 million donkeys in the world. So up there, 44 million donkeys in the world. That's not a huge number of donkeys. It's not a particularly large species. 44 million, just to give you an idea, is not far off the population of California, which I think is about 39 million. So that's of humans, that is. So 44 million donkeys in the world. At the moment, about 1.8 to 2 million donkeys are entering this trade every year. That's the legitimate number that we're hearing from the industry. The industry is intending, from what we understand, to grow that annual slaughter rate to between 4 and 10 million donkeys per year. That's the number of skins being demanded for the trade. The numbers don't really add up when you start thinking about this. If it's 4 to 10 million donkeys out of a population of 44 million donkeys, they don't quite breed fast enough to do that. And the vast majority of those 44 million, of course, are relied upon by people every day. What's happening across Africa in particular? This pattern has been replicated in other continents, but Africa is the one which I know best. I've worked there for quite a long time with the donkey sanctuary before, so this is the easiest one for me to try and tell you about. And I apologize, the next 2 slides are quite graphic. This situation was in Tanzania. This is one of the earliest cases where we found an entire village of donkeys that was taken in the night. It was stolen. It was about 25 donkeys. All of those donkeys were found, slaughtered nearby. The skins were removed. The meat was left on. The vultures, the birds, the insects, the hyenas were not touching that carcass. So there was a suspicion that there was something quite toxic in these carcasses which may have resulted in the death of the donkeys. There was no sign of a slit to the throat. It's a Maasai community. The slaughter wasn't consistent with local people and how they would slaughter donkeys. This situation, and I apologize, the next slide is more gruesome even than this. Top left is South Africa. Top right, Egypt. Bottom left, Nairobi, just outside Nairobi in Kenya. Bottom right, Botswana. It's the same picture. We're seeing this in Peru, we're seeing this in Pakistan, we're seeing this across the world. Exactly the same cases. Sometimes the meat is removed, not always. In some places, there are legal licensed slaughterhouses, such as Kenya. In some places, those slaughterhouses have been closed down because the scale of this and the threat to welfare has just been so awful. Risks to donkey welfare, I won't dwell on hugely, but let's agree that at every stage in this journey, there are risks to welfare which we need to be very concerned about. I think the next couple of slides, again, not particularly pleasant, I'm afraid. Donkeys being sourced for this trade are coming from all manner of different places. Generally speaking, donkeys such as this should not be transported. There is no incentive to provide welfare when the only valued product is the skins. Meat is taken in some cases, but it's a byproduct. In West Africa and Ghana, places like that, local people eat donkey meat, so it's disappearing onto the markets. In other places like South Africa, there's a big push against that from people like the red meat industry who are worried about contamination of the beef trade. When the skins are the only thing with any real value, it doesn't really matter how that donkey lives or how that donkey dies for an industry like this. If a donkey dehydrates to death, it just makes it easier to get the skins off. If a donkey dies through hyperlipemia, it saves you a job of taking it to a slaughterhouse. There's no real incentive. It doesn't affect the quality of the skin or the quality of the product. So that's a huge welfare challenge. Donkeys are being sourced pregnant, they're being traveled and they're aborting fetuses on the journey. All sorts of just horrendous sourcing issues. Transport, of course, is a huge concern. This transport is actually within China, but we're seeing cases across Africa as well, where donkeys are being transported ridiculously long journeys. Again, if the donkeys collapse on the way, it doesn't really affect the skins, so there's little interest in that. This was a particularly emotive photo which I took in a market in a holding base next to a slaughterhouse in Tanzania. It was a little hoof of a foal. A foal should have been nowhere near a slaughterhouse in Tanzania. Even by Tanzanian legal system, that foal should not have been transported, full stop. No idea where the foal was, but a very emotive thing to find there in the dirt. Just as a nod really to the fact that biosecurity is a huge issue here, this donkey was actually in Naivasha area and was suffering from African horse sickness. African horse sickness is one of many biosecurity hazards which are extremely concerning as part of this trade. When donkeys are crossing borders in weird and wonderful new ways, they bring with them potentially all sorts of infectious diseases. Skins could be well exported to China illegally or legally containing things like anthrax spores or something else. There's glanders risks, there's rabies risks, there's all sorts of risks to the people handling these donkeys and the skins at the slaughter sites as well. Huge concerns and very little information or evidence of this. It's happening so fast. As well as transport, you've got holding issues. Donkeys obviously do not like to be held in large groups. At this particular holding base in Tanzania, before it was shut down, this particular holding base had about 700 or 800 donkeys, and they were losing about a dozen every single day, probably through hyperlipemia, because the stress of this was just too much for those donkeys. They don't deal with this particularly well. And again, when the slaughterhouse had a capacity every day, if the donkeys died of hyperlipemia, it was almost encouraged to do that, so that you didn't have to go through the slaughterhouse and pay money to that to get the skins removed. Of course, the final step in the process for the donkeys is slaughter. I think some countries have had this false idea that maybe you can regulate slaughter, maybe you can put standards in place because the donkey skin trade, so long as the slaughter's humane, then maybe that's okay, and we can regulate and we can find a way to get value out of this trade. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work like that. We haven't found any way, we haven't heard anyone who's been able to regulate anything in this way, and of course it's much bigger than slaughter when you've got sourcing, holding, transport, handling and everything else in the way as well. This particular donkey was, we were told that this donkey was skinned alive, which is horrendous. We've traced through our partners in South Africa cases where a slaughterhouse was routinely slaughtering donkeys, skinning donkeys alive. This is a country where slaughter is completely legal as well if it's done in a certain way. There's a particular concern for us of the rise in false farms. We know how donkeys can be bred for things like the milk trade. We're not seeing that in any of the countries who are sourcing donkeys at the moment. We're not seeing any legitimate farms which could potentially have neutral welfare. This I was shown as a farm, in inverted commas, in Tanzania. You can see my footprints in the feces just walking through. There was 250 donkeys that were squished into this space from 5 o'clock in the evening every night until 9 o'clock in the morning every morning. They were allowed out to graze just during the daylight hours, and then they were squeezed back in here at night. The welfare challenges, don't even need to start talking about what the welfare challenges might be there. I'll move on. This particular issue is bigger than donkey welfare. From the Donkey Sanctuary's perspective, of course, we're going to be shouting first and foremost about welfare, but that's falling on deaf ears with people who maybe don't value donkeys that much. It's one of the reasons, actually, that I start with talking about the great things, the contributions that donkeys do. Whether we like it or not from a welfare stance, donkeys do have a contribution to humanity, so we have to sometimes be using that message to get things across to different audiences. One of those things, one of those angles which we're using, talking particularly with African governments, is the contribution that donkeys have to things like the Sustainable Development Goals. All countries have signed up to this, to the Sustainable Development Goals, and we can point clearly to at least 6 Sustainable Development Goals which donkeys are absolutely paramount in supporting. Things like water access for everybody, sustainable agriculture, livelihoods, things like that. People and donkeys are so inextricably linked. What happens to these women when these donkeys disappear? It's something which concerns water projects and governments who are supporting livelihoods as well as us from a welfare stance. Apologies, the next photo is not particularly pleasant. environmental consequences of this trade are also prevalent. This particular slaughterhouse was closed down on environmental grounds very briefly before it was closed down permanently. The issues with this particular environmental hazard was the smoke from the burning carcasses, but also the runoff into the water system. People in the local area were complaining that the water was now polluted. It's not limited to air and water pollution. There's also issues of the water generated in false farms, in people talking about mass breeding centres to try and get enough skins for this trade. It's not feasible when you start increasing the amount of water that you need just to keep donkeys in good welfare so they'll breed. We're talking about countries with severe droughts. These countries don't have spare water for somebody else's beauty treatments. So there's strong arguments to be made on that side. This may seem like a non sequitur, but this little friend is a pangolin. Each one of his scales, currently the market value is about 1,500 US dollars. He's lucrative. He's a lot more lucrative than a donkey skin, and what's more, at the borders, at customs controls, his scales are going to be found a lot quicker than donkey skins will be. So even countries with donkey skins, where donkey skins are illegal to export, people are finding abalone shells, they're finding pangolin scales, ivory links. In Afghanistan, there was links between the Taliban exporting arms and exporting donkey skins at the same time. In Colombia, there was tracked drugs being exported through the same channels as donkey skins. The links to wildlife crime, the links to other illegal activities are extremely concerning. For us, that gives us an opportunity to talk to some of the people policing wildlife crime and looking to enforce that, to say, okay, you're enforcing pangolin scales leaving the country but ignoring the donkey skins. That doesn't make sense. They're indicators of each other. Let's work together and let's figure out a way that maybe we can share our information and do these two things together. There is hope in this story. It doesn't necessarily seem that way. The little flower here is certainly a symbol of hope, but it's also a symbol of something else. If you imagine those donkey skin trade as being the center of that flower, each of those petals is a different angle looking at that same problem. So we approach it from the donkey welfare side. That's where our heart is. But of course there are others. There's the livelihoods angle, the wildlife crime angle, the water angle, there's the farming angle, there's a vegan angle, there's all sorts of different ways that we can look at this problem. We're trying our hardest to network with as many people as possible. I'm talking to you as animal welfare people, as donkey lovers, because it's important that you know about this, but we're not just talking to people like yourselves. We're trying to think of how we can approach this from different directions. Biosecurity, how can we get the OIE involved in looking at the health risks of this trade to people and other animals? This report that we've produced in January this year is certainly a little bit out of date, not least the map after that's changed a great deal this year. But we've translated this report into about 9 languages now. You can get those from our website. And we're calling for 4 recommendations at the end of this report. I'll whiz through those really quickly. Firstly, we're calling for a halt, an immediate halt in the trade in donkey skins to produce urjiao until it can be shown to be both humane for donkeys and sustainable for the communities that depend on them. That's our challenge to the industry. It's extremely unlikely that we're going to accept anyone demonstrating that. It seems the scale of this is something which cannot possibly be humane for donkeys and cannot certainly be sustainable for communities. Donkey numbers are running out. In particular, we're calling on countries to follow the example set by places like Burkina Faso and Niger, also now places like Botswana, Zimbabwe, closing slaughterhouses and stopping the export of donkeys and their skins from their borders. We're also urging governments and the industry to join us in raising public awareness about the impact of the trade, looking to talk to urjiao consumers about making an informed choice. We don't believe that China is a homogeneous blob where everybody is evil. Of course, that's not true. What we're looking for is trying to raise awareness amongst consumers. If people knew the impact that their beauty skins were having on other women in other parts of the world, maybe they would be making an informed choice. So we have to be working with consumers and with the industry itself. We're also working with governments and local authorities in places where donkeys are being sourced to support affected communities, protecting them from the illegal trade, which is rampant across the world, and preventing the decimation of donkeys through the legal trade where it still exists. More and more countries are standing against the trade. Fewer and fewer countries now have a legal operating way of getting skins out. Finally, I'll just show you this this seesaw balance. At the moment, for the industry in China, there's almost no barriers to trade. To be getting these skins out of countries, it's extremely easy. So what we're trying to do is help to make those barriers to trade more great, so that those skins are less easy to get out of those countries. So that's working with local governments, national governments, it's working with the industry itself, it's working maybe with consumers to try and change the demand as well as the supply of donkeys. On the other side of that, it's about maybe looking for alternatives. Donkey skins can be grown artificially in a lab, which may not be perfect. We may not like the fact that people are consuming donkeys at all, but it's it's significantly less suffering going into it, because a donkey doesn't need to be killed to take skin from a sample in a lab if it's grown out in sheets. So there's things like this which we're trying to look into. We're trying to do a lot of research at the moment to understand what's going on around the world. And we're putting a lot of energy into trying to work with the industry, with governments, to try and tip that scale on both sides so that we can do the best we can. Just very quickly, if anyone does have any local information from countries that you work in or places that you are, feel free to get in touch with me. My email address is on there. I'm always happy to talk to people about maybe how they can get involved locally and what different opportunities there might be for us to work together. This is very much a collaborative piece. This is not something that we're leading on. This is something where everybody's coming together. Thank you very much for your time.